Afternoon, everybody. A couple of things at the top. You probably saw a statement that I just put out about Thailand. I'd like to cover some of the high points in here as well, if I could. We condemn Thailand's forced deportation of over 100 ethnic Uyghurs to China, where they could face harsh treatment and a lack of due process, and we are concerned for the welfare of these individuals. We've expressed our grave disappointment to Thailand, and we urge Thai authorities, as well as authorities in other countries where Uyghurs have taken refuge, not to carry out any further forcible deportations. We also urge Chinese authorities to uphold international human rights norms with regard to these individuals who have been returned to China, and to ensure transparency, due process, and the safety and proper treatment of these individuals. We also likewise condemn the violent attacks against the Thai honorary consulate in Istanbul, and we urge all parties to peacefully express their views. A quick note on the U.S. and Switzerland. Today, the United States and Switzerland signed an agreement providing a framework for cooperation on vocational education and training, and also announced new apprenticeships to be offered by 18 Swiss companies here in the United States. Secretary of Commerce Pritzker and Swiss Vice President and Federal Counselor Schneider Ammann signed the agreement at the Commerce Department. The Swiss companies are bringing their expertise to the U.S. in a wide range of fields, from aircraft maintenance to insurance adjusting, IT management, software development, and machine tooling. This kind of international cooperation has a real benefit here in the United States, helping create quality jobs and career paths. And then lastly, the United States is pleased to welcome Burma as the 191st state party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. We fully support Burma's efforts and continue to offer our technical experts to assist Burma with its national implementation of the treaty as needed. Burma's commitment to join the CWC serves as a reminder that the international community is one step closer to achieving the goal of completely eliminating the scourge of chemical weapons. With that, we'll go to questions. Go ahead.
I wonder if I could ask about Russia. General Dunford told Congress today that Russia's the greatest threat to U.S. national security. I was wondering if the State Department shares that assessment.
Well, what we've said all along and continue to maintain is that Russia certainly represents significant security challenges to not just U.S. national interests, but to the national interests of our allies and partners in Europe, and that's why we are taking such significant measures in the last couple of years, particularly to make sure we can reassure our partners in Europe, can reinforce our commitment to Article 5, and to try to work towards a full implementation of the Minsk agreement. You may have seen Assistant Secretary Nuland was met with Deputy Foreign Minister Karasin today. They talked about Minsk and how to better get the agreement actually implemented, both sides. And I think you may have seen the Russian side speaking to this meeting that they thought it was productive, constructive, and the basis for further dialogue.
Could you maybe elaborate on what he might have meant by threat to U.S. national security?
I'm not going to speak for General Dunford. I think General Dunford is a seasoned American general. Hang on a second. I got you. I'll get to you. I'm not going to speak for General Dunford. I mean, a seasoned American general who is expected and is paid to offer his frank military assessment, and that's for him to speak to. Okay? Now you can go.
Thank you very much.
You're just jumping out of your chair.
Oh, God. So within 24 hours, 2 top U.S. military officials call Russia the greatest threat to U.S. national security. Is that the official position of the U.S. government?
I won't speak for the comments made by members of the senior leaders of the Defense Department. I think I stated very clearly. I think everybody in the United States government shares the same sense of concern over the security challenges that Russia is representing, particularly on the European continent.
They didn't call it a threat, a challenge. They said the greatest. Isn't it confusing that from this podium you say one thing and the top military officials say something else?
I don't know how to answer
But
your
you
question.
don't seem to be saying that, you don't, do you agree with them?
I just told you what our position here is, that we are mindful of the security challenges that Russia continues to pose on the European continent. Nobody's
you
turning a
call
blind eye to that.
Would you call it
The
the
Defense
greatest threat
Department
to the
speak
US?
to this issue, to the issue as they see it from their perspective.
But what is the US
everybody
State
in the-
Department perspective?
If you just let me finish, I
Thank you,
promise
sure.
I'll get to you. Okay? If everybody in the United States government shares the same sense of concern about where Russia is headed, their aggressive actions, their violation of Ukrainian territory and sovereignty, and everybody wants to see Minsk implemented. That is a solid position across the government. I won't speak to what other people outside this building, their assessments. They get paid to offer those assessments, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment one way or the other. We all in the United States government share the same sense of concern about where Russia is heading and what they've done over the last couple of years.
But you don't just speak just for this building, but for the foreign policy of the United States, right? So,
But
how
I don't.
can
I
you-
don't speak for Defense Department equities and what Defense Department leaders
But do
might be
you
saying.
agree with their position, with their statement
I
that
think we
Russia
all
is
agree.
the greatest?
I'll say it one
Do
more
you
time.
agree with that?
I'll say it one more time. I think we all agree
That it
and
is
share
the
a same
greatest
sense
threat.
of concern about the security challenges that Russia represents
But
on the
you do
continent.
not agree that it is the greatest threat to U.S. national security.
I've answered the question.
No, you have not.
Yes, sir.
Is it
Yes,
the
sir. Go ahead.
greatest threat to U.S.
I
national
wanted to go
security?
to Malaysia, if I may. I was wondering if you could comment on reports that the U.S. is planning to upgrade Malaysia from the bottom rank in this year's human trafficking report.
Yeah, look, I've seen these press reports about the trafficking in persons report. That report is not finalized. Work continues on it here at the State Department, and so it would be very premature for me to get into any characterization of what may or may not be in that report. What I can tell you is that the analysis that the report represents is based on a very pragmatic set of assessments in each case, and it's something we take very, very seriously. And when the report is finalized and when we can talk about it and the contents of it, we will.
So is it fair then to say that the contents of the report will be based only on the findings made by the relevant department and the investigators and not on any considerations such as Malaysia's participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations?
Well, I think, as you know, I mean, this is a report we have to do annually. We take it very, very seriously, and it is it's one that is done with a significant amount of coordination here at the State Department across directorates here inside the State Department, and that's how the report is pulled together and factored in. It's as I said, done on a very pragmatic analysis of various factors.
Sure, but I think what people are wondering is, there's independent experts and NGOs say that Malaysia has not made any kind of improvement in its trafficking in persons record, and so any upgrade by the United States State Department would smack of a effort by the administration to bypass a provision passed by Congress in TPA that would bar TPP from being fast-tracked if Malaysia was included.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can tell us from the podium that would not be the case, that would not be a consideration in where Malaysia winds up in the trafficking in persons report.
Well, again, you're asking me to talk about details in a report that hasn't been finalized yet, and I'm just not going to do that, and I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals. What I will tell you is that the report is put together here at the State Department. It's well coordinated inside across the bureaus, and many factors go into the ratings that are given to countries. It's not done from a political perspective. It's done from a pragmatic analysis of progress made or not made in the trafficking of people.
Okay, but it's a simple yes or no question of whether the administration's desire to include Malaysia in the Trans-Pacific Partnership will influence its standing in the trafficking in persons report. Is that
I'm not going to
yes or
talk
no?
about a report that hasn't been finalized.
It has more
But
to do with the
suggest-
process of putting
no,
the
I
report
understand.
together
I
than
mean,
with the actual report.
But I'm not going to get ahead of a report that's not done yet. I know what you'd like me to say. I'm just not going to go there until this report is done. What I can tell you is the analysis that's done is, again, very pragmatic. It's very focused on facts. It's about progress made or not made. And there's as there should be, a rigorous discussion about those facts and that analysis before a final adjudication is made on any given country in that report. But it's not finalized yet. Ma'am, if you're going to ask me the same question again, I'm not gonna have any kind of a different answer for you.
Is the official position of the U.S. government different from the position of the country's top military generals, officials?
I've told you how we view the security challenges that Russia represents. I am not going to speak for the assessments made by leaders outside this department. That is not my role, it's not my place, and it would be inappropriate. And I'm not going to take any more questions on this. Saeed?
Yeah, very quickly, John. I assume that you're speaking about General Dunford's testimony on the Hill. Is that
That was
is
the
that a
basis
top-
of the question.
Okay. Now he also said just
About 10 questions ago.
Okay. Let me just. I'm sorry. Apologies for being late. I just wanted to ask you whether this consideration of arming Ukraine.
Yeah.
Is that something that we are likely to see in the next couple of weeks?
There's
or
been
3
no
weeks?
change to the U.S. policy about assistance to Ukraine. We continue to review and examine all Ukrainian requests for assistance as we have. The focus of the support that's been provided has been on the non-lethal side. I'm not aware of it. Not that I'm not aware. There are no policy changes with respect to that.
And just a quick follow-up. There's also been reports that Chechen fighters and other Islamist extremists are actually going into Ukraine to fight against the rebels in eastern Ukraine. Are you aware of these reports?
We've seen these reports, and what I would say, Saeed, is that we've long talked to Ukrainian authorities about the composition and the makeup of volunteer or militia forces that are in Ukraine, and we've certainly provided our counsel with respect to how adequate organization, command and control, and that kind of thing should be done. Yeah. Here.
Germany?
Germany.
Yeah.
Sure.
The Weekly Spiegel today published that U.S. is pushing to Chancellor Angela Merkel in order to Greece to stay in the euro. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, look, on Greece, let me just restate what we've been saying here. Secretary Liu is sort of leading the coordination efforts here in the United States government on what's happening with Greece. But essentially, this is between Greece and their creditors. And that's where the discussion lies. I won't speak for what Secretary Liu's views may be on this. We're watching this situation closely, just like everybody else. And what we want here at the State Department is a path forward that allows Greece to continue the necessary reforms it needs, to return to a rate of growth, and to deal with their debt in a sustainable way. And that's really where we are focused right now. Okay? Yep.
Germany-based Focus magazine published a report claiming NSA spied on a top Turkish security meeting about a possible Turkish intervention in Syria to protect the Turkish enclave in 2014. The magazine claims NSA tapped Turkish intelligence chief Hakan Fidan's phone and therefore collected the audio from the meeting. This story is on many front pages of today's Turkish newspapers. Does U.S. government spy on Turkish authorities, or do you have any comment on that?
I'll say the same thing I've been saying throughout when we've talked about these issues. We're not going to comment publicly on every specific alleged intelligence or disclosure activity. I would refer you to the National Security Council for anything more. Yeah.
On that. Can you update us on the meeting of General Allen with the Turkish counterpart? It seems that the United States government is trying to sort of press Turkey to sort of control its border a little better and disallowing against the entry of foreign fighters.
What I can tell you, Saeed, is that General Allen, as well as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Christine Wormuth, as well as an interagency delegation, did hold constructive meetings over the course of the last couple of days with Turkish counterparts. to discuss our mutual efforts in the coalition, a broad coalition against ISIL. And I believe General Allen will be returning shortly from those discussions. I'm not going to detail all the various things that were discussed, but I think you can understand that, I mean, again, it was a pretty wide-ranging sets of discussions about all the different challenges we're facing against ISIL there.
But you don't see eye to eye with the Turks on the local partners, because you definitely look at the Kurdish fighters in the north one way, and Turkey looks at them in another. Is this a potentially a point of conflict between you and Turkey?
Well, we've talked about this before, Saeed. I mean, look, we understand the Turkish concerns with respect to fighters across the border. We've long said that. This is not a new topic of discussion. It's not something that we ignore. What our focus on inside Syria is against ISIL. That's the focus of the coalition effort. And I like to remind everybody that Turkey is a part of that coalition, not just a NATO ally, but a part of that coalition. And they're contributing to the effort. They also have a significant refugee problem that they're dealing with, and dealing with ably, considering the heavy demands that these millions of refugees are placing upon their infrastructure. So lots of issues to discuss with Turkey, understand those concerns, but I think everybody shares a concern about where ISIL is going and about moving forward and trying to stop this group.
Follow up on Turkey.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can confirm the reports that the part of the Incirlik air base is now open to coalition or U.S. forces to use more actively against ISIL?
No, I mean, I've seen some press reporting on that, but I'm in no position to confirm any kind of decision in that regard.
One more on Turkey. A couple of weeks ago, you were asked about this letter sent by the Secretary Kerry to the Congress regarding strategic dialogue between the Turkey and U.S. regarding the human rights issues. I was wondering if you have any update on that proposal.
I do not. No.
You do not.
Yep.
On the, I don't know, it's a base or just something in Erbil that I think you mentioned in the past would be used for the rescue mission when you were at the DoD. I asked you some questions. So is there any update that this base, it's not a base, but it is also would be used for the rescue mission? What is the update?
I love how you're trying to get me to answer this by saying it's not a base. And since I'm not a military guy anymore, I should be able to talk to places that aren't bases. I don't have any update for it. You'd have to go to DOD.
Okay.
And I'm no longer an employee at DOD. So, yeah.
Bolivia.
Yeah.
We spoke to President Morales this morning, and he says that he wants to restore full diplomatic relations with the United States, but he's not received a response to a request to meet with President Obama. I just wonder what the U.S. position is and what it would take to restore full relations with Bolivia.
Our position is that we continue to engage with the Bolivian government to discuss the avenues for improving the relationship. We seek a productive relationship based on mutual respect and trust. There's a number of areas in which we do engage cooperatively with the Bolivian government, including commercial and environmental issues. I mean, if you exclude natural gas, for instance, we're the largest importer of Bolivian goods in the world. So there's lots of issues that we can that are uniquely bilateral: cultural preservation, people-to-people exchanges, and then so there are ways we're engaging. We're always looking for ways to try to improve that, but I don't have any announcements to make.
But specifically on restoring full relations, what is there a conditions-based process?
I don't have
What is-
any updates on the with respect to the restoration of diplomatic relations. As I said at the outset, we're always seeking to try to find ways to improve the bilateral relationship. Saeed.
Go to Iran talks. I know we can't improve on what the Secretary said, but I wanted to ask you regarding Congress, now that they have more time, would that really sort of relieve the pressure on the negotiations, perhaps give the United States a much stronger position to negotiate over the next, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks?
Well, the question implies that the deadline of the 9th, or the time of the 9th, was somehow driving the pace of negotiations, and that's just not so. That has not been a factor weighing heavily on Secretary Kerry's mind over there in Vienna. You heard him say it today. These talks are not going to be open-ended, but that while progress is being made, he believes it's important to stay at the table. And that's, as I've said day after day after day, that's where his head is what is inside that negotiating room and trying to reach the right deal for the American people and for our national security interests.
What about congressional pressure? Does that give Congress more of a leeway to even exert more pressure on the Secretary and on the administration on what kind of deal they have to negotiate?
Well, the legislation as written gives them more time now to review the document. But it doesn't, it's not going to fundamentally change the character of any deal that's reached. And I would remind you, there's no deal right now. And again, I think the Secretary was far more eloquent about it today than I can be, that whatever deal, if we get a deal, it's going to have to be good enough to withstand the test of time. And he put it in terms of decades. So I think he was very clear about what he's driving at. And it's not being driven by the clock on the wall or the date on the calendar. Yes.
The Democratic senators who met with the president came back and quoted him as saying chances of a deal are less than 50-50. Does the department agree with those odds?
Well, I'm not going to speak to specifics about the president, what he may or may not have said to congressmen at the White House. That would be inappropriate here. I can point you, though, and I will say that the president and Secretary Kerry, for many, many months now, have been very pragmatic and clear-eyed about how they've spoken to potential outcomes here. And you can go back and look for yourself. But I think the president, the vice president as well, and certainly Secretary Kerry have made it very clear that nothing's a done deal until there is a deal. And that and they've been I think suitably pragmatic about what the outcomes might be. And I think again, you heard Secretary Kerry say it again today. I mean, I think he expressed the same exact, clear-eyed sense of it today that he always has. Yeah.
Another new subject?
Sure.
Couple questions.
It's not about yoga, is it?
No yoga. I hope you're doing great anyway. You have done your yoga at the DOD.
Yes, I did.
A couple questions. As far as this BRICS made of 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa,
right,
meeting in Russia. Anything new you have that any impact on U.S. and bilateral relations with these 5 countries? What they decide, and also signing and inaugurating the development bank, this may be a challenge to the IMF and World Bank?
Okay, those are 2 different things, I think, Goyle. I don't have any update on what's coming out of the BRIC conference. As you know, Foreign Minister Lavrov departed. I think he's back in Vienna now, but or if not, will be soon. And but I wouldn't have any readouts from that. I mean, this is a conference that I think I'd let national leaders speak to their participation. I think what you're talking about is the AIIP, right? The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Nothing's changed about our position on that. I mean, look, these are, first of all, decisions that nations have to make for themselves, and that what we would like to see, and I said this before, is that the same sort of procedures, process, transparency, discipline, an organization that is applied to organizations like the IMF, would be used for the AIIP. That China wants to lead or help do this. I mean, that could be a productive thing. But it's the devil's going to be in the details, and we're just going to have to see.
And second, as far as India and Pakistan relations are concerned, 2 leaders also meeting in Russia at this meeting. But the problem is, people of Pakistan and people of India both want peace. Both want these 2 civilian leaders to meet and solve the problems and open the doors for people to people. But Now, I understand that according to experts in Pakistan, also in India, also here in the US, Pakistan is being run by three governments: civilian government under Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, ISI, and the military. Whenever two leaders, two nations wants to meet, somehow before their meeting, the statement will come. Last time the statement was made by General Musharraf, and now the statement was made yesterday by the defense minister of Pakistan that we have bombs, nuclear bomb, and if needed, we will use against India, and also it is a warning for India. So what do we make? What is the future? What role do you think U.S. can play to bring these two civilian governments on a table rather than involving because India's military is not involving anywhere in these talks or the intelligence agencies of India, but only it happens from Pakistan.
Well, look, I didn't see those comments, and I can't speak for how leaders in either country are going to make announcements on their bilateral relationship or, frankly, their bilateral tensions. I think we welcome the recent meeting between Indian and Pakistani leaders there on the sidelines of this conference, and we also welcome any steps that both countries can take to try to reduce the tensions. That's been our longstanding position. You heard the Secretary say it here just a couple of weeks ago. We want to see the tensions reduced, and we want to see these issues resolved bilaterally between the two countries. It's in nobody's interest for the tensions to rise and to increase, and for the tensions in the region to become less stable, in many ways than they already are. You mentioned both want peace. That's certainly what we want as well. There's an awful lot of kids living in that part of the world who I think everybody wants to make sure they have a better future. And I think that's what we would hope the leaders in both countries are also trying to pursue. But this is ultimately, these are issues that we want to see them solved bilaterally.
May I go one more, John, back? This on Greece, question on Greece, financial problems, please.
Yeah.
Once Greek was a major financial center, and it's an old ancient, and Alexander the Great, he made money, today's economy, billions and billions of dollars by hooks and crooks. But what he said when he left the world before he died, he opened both his hands and he said, I'm not taking anything with me, and I'm leaving all this wealth for my future generation. My question is here, you think this impact of Greece may follow other nations in Europe because President Obama's initiative to open the Swiss banks where all the black market money was going, including billions and billions from India, and now the banks are open, and of course, thanks to the U.S. Treasury and the President Obama. You think this is because of this happening, all this?
Well, you got me on Alexander the Great. I got a history degree from the University of South Florida, but I didn't learn that part of him. I guess of course, my grades weren't all that good, so I might just have been asleep that day. I mean, look, I think I'm not going to get into a forensics on how Greece got to the point that it's in right now. We're watching this closely, and I think again, and I won't speak for Secretary Lew or the Treasury Department, but I think it's safe to say that from a U.S. government perspective, what we want to see is debt sustainability. We want to see Greece work this out with their creditors, and I would just point you to what Greek leaders have said themselves. Prime Minister specifically, that he sees the future of Greece in the Eurozone.
Thank you, sir.
Saeed.
On the former Secretary Clinton's emails. Apparently in an email, Secretary Clinton early in 2009 told her staff that she got a call from former Secretary Condoleezza Rice that there's been no promises by the former administration, the Bush administration, to okay settlement and settlement expansion and so on. I wonder if you would comment on that, or are you aware of the email?
I don't have any visibility on that specific email, Saeed. And I, just as a matter of principle, as I've tried to do from here, and we're not going to get into the specific content of the email traffic.
Because the Israelis and the former Israeli ambassador to this town is disputing that. This is basically the Obama administration broke with a promise that it had given former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon on the expansion of settlements.
I just, again, I'm not going to get into the content of this email traffic, but Saeed, you know very well our policy on settlements hasn't changed at all. It remains exactly the same. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.